Did you know that Pepsi has partnered with Racetrack so you can enjoy the big game on Sunday in the best way? This Friday through Sunday only, if you buy a whole extra-large pizza at regular price at any participating Racetrack location, you get a free 2-liter Pepsi with the Racetrack Rewards app. Yeah, that's right. Oh, man, forget this. Let's head to Racetrack to get our extra-large pizza and free Pepsi. Offer available at participating Racetrack locations from February 9th through 11th or while supplies last.
It's the biggest Sunday of the year.
No, that's not why.
It's not because of the big game?
Nope. It's because you get a free 2-liter Pepsi when you buy a regular price extra large whole pizza with the Racetrack Rewards app.
That does sound like a great offer. And pizza's always better with Pepsi.
Just download the app and enjoy hot, fresh pizza and your favorite Pepsi product while you cheer on your team.
Available at participating Racetrack locations from 2/9 through 2/11 or while supplies last.
Thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to our podcast. This is iCompete, Building Your Empire with John Hewitt, live from the castle. Hi, I'm Roberta Barrett. I'm John Hewitt's producer. You might be asking, who is John Hewitt? Well, he is the Hewitt in Jackson Hewitt Tax Services. If you want to find out more about John Hewitt and what he's currently doing, go to loyaltybrands.com. That's loyaltybrands.com, or find John T. Hewitt on LinkedIn or Facebook. John Hewitt's made over 1,000 millionaires, and you could be the next one. Here is your host, John Hewitt.
Thank you, Roberta. And I want to welcome Bob Gappa, who's one of the most incredibly experienced people ever. He's almost as old as I am. He's been in franchising his almost his entire career. And tell us about yourself, Bob.
Well, I've been very fortunate to have great mentors. And when I formed Management 2000, 41 years ago, what I wanted to do was help people who either were franchising or who wanted to franchise to do it better, quicker, and faster. And so we developed a consultancy to those entities, and I think really contributed. And I've been blessed to be able to work with over 1,650 brands in 41 years and believe in missions, visions, values, and processes get you better results. Thanks, John.
That's awesome. And I don't know of anyone else that even consulted with over 300 brands, let alone 1,650. That's just, wow, amazing. What to talk about?
And working with you too, and 2 of your other brands. So that's been a real blessing for me.
Right. So it's my 2 and the other 1,648, right? So I want to talk about business authors, and I had an epiphany related to one that I think an author that is one of your favorites too, Peter Drucker. What do you know about Peter Drucker?
Well, I know that he couldn't get a business degree, and so he got a degree in another field and came to America. And one of his first jobs was with Sloan and Kettering at General Motors, reorganizing General Motors basically against Ford. And he helped them understand that the customer was more important than the car. And getting people and getting an understanding of who the customer was and what they valued and how General Motors could enhance what the customer valued, help them sell more cars. And so he focused General Motors around the customer, not the car. And I know that his books on have been of great help for me and a lot of other people around the world. And he's often called the father of management. That's what I know.
Do you know what year that was approximately, what decade that he was working at General Motors?
I don't for sure, John, but I'm thinking 50s. But what I also know is that there were very, very few business schools at that time where you could go and focus in undergraduate or graduate school. And so management and leadership really exploded in this country because rather than just using the military model, after the wars, because leadership was a lot about that. Drucker focused on the customer, and it made a different business model for leadership and management. So that's too long of an answer to your short question.
Not there can't ever be too much information about giving, exceeding customers' expectations. And one of my favorite stories on focusing on the customer versus not caring and not doing a great job is, I think the story goes, and you can embellish it for me, that in the teens, in the 1917, 18, 19, Ford, there was Ford Motor Company, and of course Henry Ford invented the assembly line, and he was crushing everyone. And my recollection of the story is there was Ford, who had about a 50% market share, and there was a bunch of smaller ones with 1 or 2% market share, and there was 20, 30, 40 different organizations. And Henry Block, in one of the most obnoxious, backward thinking of a customer, came up with it. To me, I think it's virtually the dumbest thing that's ever been said. He said, they can have any color that they want as long as it's black. And
right.
And General Motors got a group they got together the Pontiac and the Buick and the whatever, all the different brands, and they said, we're not only are we going to give the customer, we're going to listen to the customer, because we asked the customer, what do you want? And they said, we want different colors. And Ford said, again, they can have any color they want, just as long as they get black. And so he was just deaf ear to the customer. And then they started giving them like seats, padded seats, instead of the hard seats. And it wasn't even 10 years, maybe 5 years, that General Motors became bigger than Ford. And it was just simply by listening to customers. And that's happened so often in there's so many great stories in history about that, for example, I believe it was in the 30s, that Coke had a market share of about 70% or 80%, and Pepsi had 15, and RC Cola, I think, had 5. And so there was 3 big brands, and Pepsi came hit with an incredible marketing philosophy. And they said, and should I quiz you and ask you why Pepsi almost caught Coke, or should I give you the answer?
Give me the answer.
Okay. So what Pepsi did is, simplistically, and this was about the time World War II, and a bottle of Coke was a nickel. And so what Pepsi did is they doubled the size, and they said twice as much for a nickel. And so for a few years, Coke said, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. That's not going to work. And meantime, Pepsi was catching them, and Coke was following. And Coke went down to about a 50% market share from about 80, and Pepsi went up to about a 45% market share and almost caught them, until you know what Coke did? They copied Pepsi, because they listened to the customer. And that's just, there's so many examples. And I learned a long time ago, in business, you don't make money from trying to change customers' mind. You make money from giving them what they want. And the last story I'll tell on that one is the Avis story. Hertz in the 50s, almost no one as old as I am can remember the 50s, but in the 50s, they didn't have rent-a-cars. There was no Hertz or Avis or National or any. There was no rental cars. What you would do is, and there was not a lot of travel either, so there wasn't a big demand. And Hertz flew into Los Angeles, and the only place you could rent a car was at a car dealer. So he took a taxi from the airport into the car dealer, and he said, well, that doesn't make any sense. That's a 20-minute drive. There should be a rental place right next to the airport. And so they became a national company, Fortune 500 company. And a few years later, Walter Avis walked through an airport and said, why should I have to go outside, take a bus, and go 2 miles to the rent-a-car? look at that space over there, that corner. I could put a little desk over in that corner, a kiosk, and they could rent cars right here. And for 3 years, Hertz said, and it's in the Walter Avis story. There's a book about it. But for 3 years, Hertz said, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. That's not going to work. And finally, just in time, they started going into the airports just like Avis was. And so they were able to maintain their market share. But each of those companies, great companies, just great companies, didn't pay attention to customers. And I think it's almost a CEO disease that when they take over a company, they think they're supposed to know everything. And what they're supposed to do is, in my opinion, is take the pulse of the customers and give the customers what they want, to exceed the customers' expectations. So
interesting.
There was no question that, but were you going to comment?
Well, what I was thinking about, because you're on track very definitely, or with what you're talking about with CEOs. The thing I've noticed is that at the luxury end of any product or service is where the companies have to pay more attention to the voice of the customer, whether it's renting jets or yachts or resorts or hotels or cars. Whenever you get to the most expensive end of a product or service, people pay the most attention to the voice of the customer because they have such a smaller group of people they have to win over. And people in the middle don't listen to that advice, that reality.
Yep. And let me talk to you about an epiphany I had that's related to this and this management style in the Peter Drucker, the Effective Executive. You want to tell us the story about Lincoln and Grant? What happened with Ulysses S. Grant and Lincoln and Congress? You know that story?
Are we talking? Well, let me see if I do, and correct me real quickly. Break in if I'm not thinking what you're thinking about. Grant was winning a lot of wars, but he had a drinking problem, and the generals were trying to get rid of Grant because he was such a threat to them, and they tried to talk Lincoln out of preferring Grant. And I believe there was something in there who said, I know you guys think he's got a drinking problem. Maybe you guys should start drinking because he never loses battle. Was it something like that?
Yeah, but yes, it was exactly like that. But I'm going to expand that story a little.
Oh, good.
Okay. Because one of the things he says in the book, and if you have to start with this premise and believe it for the story to make sense. And that is, he says in The Effective Executive, and it's all about this premise that the people with great strengths have great weaknesses. The more great your strengths are, the more weaknesses you have. The less strengths, the less weaknesses. And he said, but you can't hire people that for not having weaknesses, because then you get people that are mediocre, that won't take chances, that won't perform and won't do anything. So what you need to be able to do is to hire someone that has great strengths, but you can put up with their weaknesses. And sometimes, as in this case with Grant, it's a fine line whether you can put up with it. And so it started out that I think the first general that Lincoln hired was McClellan, and he sat with 3 times the soldiers, 5 times the amount of horses, 10 times as much money, 5 times as much guns and ammunition. And he sat there because he didn't want to make a mistake for a year. In the meantime, Robert E. Lee is running around the countryside, winning little battles and skirmishes and grabbing Union land. And so Lincoln fires him. And then he hired another general. And I guess Lincoln hadn't learned his lesson by that point, because the second general, he sat there for 3 months, but Lincoln was less patient. He got rid of him. And then he hired Ulysses S. Grant. And Grant attacked and he won, and then he attacked and he lost, and then he won 2 and he lost 1 and won 3 and lost 1, and we're winning the war. And now something was happening, and the end was in sight. We were winning the war, but as you said, he was apparently a drunk, and so Congress finally came. They sent a bipartisan group of congressmen came to the White House to ask Lincoln, say, you got to fire him. He's an embarrassment. He's not a gentleman. He has his dog he swears. He fires his gun up in the air, and he's a total drunk. And Lincoln said to his secretary, he said, James, find out what brand of alcohol Grant drinks and buy a barrel for each of my generals. And they went out of there with their tails between their legs, right? And of course, Not only did Grant win the war, but he became the president of the United States. So I guess he must not have been that much of a drunk. But if Grant had gone too far, let's say in one of his drunken rampages, he shot someone, right? And killed one of his own people, then he would have had been to get rid of. But Lincoln was able to put up with his weaknesses because of his great strengths. And I've been preaching that for decades, and I finally realized that in my companies, my epiphany that I just had over the last week was this: that almost everyone comes to me complaining about someone else. Virtually all my employees come in, especially my executives, and they complain about the other one, right? And so I've come to realize that 98% of people are not Lincoln. 98% of people don't get it. They don't understand. It's so easy, Bob, to cut someone down and talk about their weaknesses. Have you ever found someone you couldn't? I mean, you're a consultant, so that's what you get paid to do, is find people's weaknesses, right? Isn't it always easy to find people's weaknesses?
Absolutely. And I'll share this story with you. When I left working for the Catholic bishops, and the bishop I worked for wanted to help me transfer into secular life with the skill sets he perceived I had, he introduced me to Joe Batten. I've mentioned he wrote Tough Minded Management and some other books that are really good and positive. And when you joined his company, Joe Batten's company, in the first 30 days, you had to list 100 of your strengths, because he said, we're consultants and we have to help companies spot the strengths of people so they can be deployed for results. And so working for him was the first time in my life where someone said, we don't do a SWOT analysis. We do, where are the gaps in the strengths we need to achieve our results, and let's find people who have the strengths to fill those gaps. He would not tolerate talking about people's weaknesses. And I don't do it either. It's too easy.
You said a word, that acronym that some of the listeners aren't going to know. SWOT.
SWOT, yeah.
What is that?
Strengths, weaknesses, internal strengths and weaknesses, external threats and opportunities. And what I look at is strengths and gaps, threats and opportunities.
You know, it's interesting that when you say that, and the lesson you learn, because on our call, our internal call with the CEOs of a dozen of our brands, you said that you asked them each for their goals, and you asked them, okay, now if you're going to achieve that goal, what are the key things that we need to achieve, or the key resources you need to achieve those goals? You didn't ask them what the threats or the threats there, but you focused on the key the key ingredients for their success. And why'd you do that? Why didn't you say, okay, I mean, were you deliberately thinking that I'm not going to ask them, okay, what stands in the way of that? I'm going to ask them what they need, what tools, resources they need to achieve their goals.
My experience is that most of the clients I've had in my life look for what their constraints and roadblocks are rather than what they can do and focus on doing that better. Oftentimes that takes care of and eliminates the constraints and bottlenecks. Sometimes not, but people are not, as you said, they're just not as aware of their strengths as it is their perceived weaknesses. Anyway, that's, it's a waste of time. You got to be aware of what your gaps are, what you need to succeed. And if you call those weaknesses, then you're going to be inhibited by that awareness. You just look at it. You're looking at it the wrong way. Kind of like the glass half full, half empty, in a way.
You've consulted with 1,650 countries or companies, more than 1,650. What percentage of them would you say were great companies?
Less than 5%.
And
less than 5%.
And the 5%, the greatest companies, what did they focus on strengths and they focus on results, or were they micromanagers, activity driven, and trying to cut out their weaknesses?
They focused on, first of all, the customer and how you maximize the markets the franchisees were in, how you dominated the markets you were in, and they focused on true accountability for results so that I don't have to be concerned, unless you're brand new in the company, I don't have to be concerned with whether or not you're getting results and doing the right things. It's like I say about you and your companies. You create the future and you depend on other people to make it happen. It's not that you don't check on the numbers to make sure that's going on, but your focus is on creating the future in your brands, not managing the present.
And what percentage of the companies were just didn't understand this simple concept? Because this, to me, is the simplest concept of success in as a franchisor. And I have to say that over the last 10 years, half the companies that have started in franchising that thought they could be a franchisor have failed. And so of the 1,650, how many do you think understood this simple concept? Happy, successful franchisees. The key to success is happy, successful franchisees and happy, successful employees.
John, it's got to be, again, less than 5%.
It's a differentiator, and it's not a hard concept. You know, when I left my last franchisor, on the wall we had it in big letters, like 4-foot letters: happy, successful franchisees. And within 2 months of me leaving, they whitewashed the wall. So you walked into the building, and it used to say happy, successful franchisees, and now you're looking at a white wall. And they showed it by the way they acted. But that was a little bit over the top when they took it off the wall, because they didn't want any franchisees. I assume, I try not to get in the cesspool of how they think, but I assume that they thought, well, if that's on the wall and I don't act that way, then they're going to come back to me and point at that. You're not making me successful. And so I assume that's why they whitewash it. But success isn't extraordinarily difficult to understand. The basics of success are pretty simple. And, you know, people in my career have mostly said, when they've asked me, who's the biggest competitor or the biggest problem? And I said, we ourselves are the biggest problem, because we have to follow the principles. We have to exceed customers' expectations. I'm not worried about my competitors. I'm not worried about H&R Block or Jackson Hewitt or Liberty or anyone else. If we do our job, we're going to win. And one of my former franchisees he tried to spank me on social media, and he said something about me competing with him, and I said, Ed, if you do your job, if you exceed customers' expectations, I can't hurt you. You will succeed. It's not, Ed, it isn't, my competition isn't going to hurt you. You can only hurt yourself.
Yeah, if I didn't know who you were talking about that whitewashed the wall, I would say that their demise is close by because they've taken their eye off the reason for being in business is economic performance, and you can't get that without somebody buying what you have for sale. And the only way for people to want is you either have an exclusive or you do a better job at making them want what you have. And to me, that's the difference between a brand and a company. A brand is something that people want whether they can get it or not. And people wanted an iPhone before whether they could get it or not. They loved it before they owned it. That's a brand. A phone I can get anywhere, but a product that other people love and I want to love it too, like flying Emirates, business class or first class. People hear about that and they want to do it. It seems that sometimes other airlines' mission statement is, we're not happy till you're not happy. And they seem to train people on that. But, we're only happy when you're happy is what you're achieving with happy, satisfied franchisees. Because happy, satisfied franchisees are happy and satisfied because they have happy and satisfied customers, right?
Exactly. And we have about 2 minutes left. And last question, and I don't know if you can say it in 2 minutes. Maybe we need to go for a whole nother 30 minutes. But how do you change that mentality? How do people get to be like a Lincoln? And can they make that change? Can they forget people's weaknesses and overlook them and say, wow, that person's really good? I mean, guess how many times someone comes into my office and says, that person's really good. They just did a great job. Can they overcome that?
My answer to that is each person who gets there has an epiphany. And you can orchestrate some epiphanies and some you can't. But people have to be open to going from good to better and better to best. And when they get the epiphany about who are our customers, what do they value, how can we enhance what they value, and they get knocked off their whatever, they'll be different. But it's a personal epiphany that makes it happen. I think you've had it. Other people have had it. And until you have it, you can't do anything about it. I don't think you can teach it. You can orchestrate it. But they have to have their own epiphany.
Agreed. And to do that, usually you have to be committed to improvement. And I think that's one of the many ways that you and I are like that. We are of a lifetime commitment to improve. And your team, their management 30 years ago when we did set up our organization with our principles and our mission statement. Our mission statement was improve each day.
Winning customers for life, right?
Yep. Thank you, Bob. It was great talking to you. A pleasure. And hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
Feel the same. Bye.
Thank you for taking the time to learn about how to build your empire with John Hewitt. Find John on LinkedIn at John T. Hewitt or message John Hewitt on Facebook. This is iCompete, live from the castle, building your empire with John Hewitt. Don't miss new episodes every Monday by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, cpnshows.com, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time, this was iCompete, building your empire with John Hewitt.
Spoiler alert, a 2-word warning that we're about to ruin the end. But sometimes, spoilers can be worthwhile. And so we designed the Lexus NX to reveal many things. like taking the mystery out of how close you are between parking space lines, or the time you'll arrive at your dinner reservation. Technology designed to remove surprise endings. It's just a better story that way. Click the banner to discover more. Experience amazing at your Lexus dealer.
When Cynthia came to TurboTax, she had just launched her new side gig, a true crime podcast.
I'm a first-rate detective with a golden voice.
As her TurboTax expert, I made her second income count by guaranteeing 100% accurate filing and her maximum refund.
What did she do with that refund? Find out next week.
Switch to Intuit TurboTax and make your moves count. See guarantee details at turbotax.com/guarantees. Experts only available with TurboTax Live.